The walker made a hollow sound against the hardwood floor. Tap, 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 as I navigated from the kitchen to the living room. Each step reminded me of what I'd lost. The confident stride that once carried me through real estate showings. The steady gait that had walked me down countless aisles at the grocery store without a second thought. The purposeful march that had built my life from nothing into something substantial. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Now, at 68, I was learning to lean. "Mom, you sure you don't need help with that tea?" Craig called from the kitchen, his voice carrying that particular tone I'd grown to recognize. Part concern, part impatience, all guilt. "I'm fine," I called back, settling into the leather recliner that had followed me from my house to his. The irony wasn't lost on me that this chair, which had once sat in my living room overlooking the garden I'd tended for 30 years, now faced a wall-mounted television playing endless reruns of shows I didn't recognize. The stroke had been my second. The first, 3 years ago, I'd weathered with stubborn independence, refusing help, learning to write with my left hand when my right wouldn't cooperate for 2 months. That one had been a warning shot. This one, 6 months ago, had been a declaration of war against my body. My left leg dragged slightly now, my speech slurred when I was tired, and my memory, my memory played tricks on me that left me questioning everything I thought I knew. But my mind was sharp enough to know when I wasn't wanted. I'd been living with Craig and his wife Penelope for 4 months now. 4 months of careful politeness, of being asked if I needed anything in that bright, hollow voice people use with children and invalids. 4 months of watching Penelope rearrange my medications with the efficiency of someone handling nuclear waste. Necessary, but unpleasant. The afternoon light streaming through their living room window was different from the light in my house. Harsher somehow, without the filter of the oak tree that had shaded my front windows for decades. Everything here felt borrowed, temporary, like I was a guest who had overstayed her welcome, which I was beginning to suspect I had. "Eileen, are you comfortable?" Penelope appeared in the doorway, wearing that smile I'd seen her practice in mirrors, the one where her lips curved but her eyes remained calculating. She was 42, though she'd fight you if you mentioned it, with the kind of aggressive blonde highlights that required monthly maintenance, and the wardrobe of someone who'd married up and never let anyone forget it. "Comfortable enough," I said, adjusting the throw blanket across my legs. It was one of mine, rescued from the house when we'd temporarily moved me here while I recovered. The recovery, it seemed, was taking longer than anyone had anticipated. Penelope's smile tightened. "Craig and I were thinking, maybe we should talk about making some changes to help with your situation, my situation, as if my stroke was a lifestyle choice rather than a medical emergency that had upended everything I'd built in nearly 7 decades of living." "What kind of changes?" I asked, though something in my chest already knew this conversation would matter. The air in the room shifted, the way it does before a thunderstorm, electric with unspoken tension. "Well, maintaining 2 households is expensive," she said, perching on the edge of the sofa like a bird ready to take flight. "And you're not really using the house anymore. It's just sitting there, collecting dust, running up utility bills. My house. The 4-bedroom colonial on Maple Street that I'd bought 35 years ago with the insurance money from Anderson's death. The house where I'd raised Craig as a widow, working double shifts at the real estate office to make the mortgage payments. The house where I'd hosted every one of his birthday parties, every Christmas morning, every graduation celebration. The house that still held my life in its rooms, waiting for me to come home. "I am going home," I said quietly, "when I'm stronger." Penelope's laugh was bright and sharp as breaking glass. "Oh, Eileen, that's sweet, but let's be realistic. The doctor said I need time to recover. They didn't say I was an invalid." "Of course not," Craig said, appearing with a cup of tea that he set on the side table with the careful precision of someone handling explosives. "But Mom, you can't live alone anymore. It's not safe. Remember what happened last time?" Last time. As if I could forget. I'd fallen in my bathroom at 3 in the morning, hit my head on the sink, and lay there for 6 hours before Mrs. Williamson next door noticed my newspapers were still on the front porch and called the police. The stroke had happened 2 days later in the hospital. Cause and effect, the doctors said. The fall might have triggered it. We just want what's best for you, Penelope added, and there was something in her voice, a note I couldn't quite identify. Later, I would recognize it as the sound of someone who had already made a decision and was going through the motions of consultation. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. They exchanged a look, one of those married couple communications that happen in the space between heartbeats. Penelope nodded almost imperceptibly. We think you should sell the house, Craig said, the words coming out in a rush. Use the money to secure your future. Maybe look into one of those nice assisted living places, or we could fix up the basement here. Make it into a proper apartment for you. The basement, where they stored Christmas decorations and Craig's old sports equipment, and the broken lawnmower that had been awaiting repair for 3 years. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. A familiar sensation I remembered from the early days of my real estate career when clients would lie to my face about their intentions, their finances, their commitment to a sale. It was the feeling of being underestimated, of being seen as naive or desperate or both. I see, I said carefully. It makes financial sense, Penelope continued, warming to her theme. Real estate prices are high right now. You could get a good price, and then you wouldn't have to worry about maintenance, property taxes, all those headaches. Headaches. As if owning a home was a burden rather than an achievement. As if the house that represented everything I'd worked for was some kind of millstone around my neck. I sipped my tea, too weak the way Penelope made it, and nodded as if I was considering their proposal. Inside, something was crystallizing, hardening into a shape I didn't yet recognize but could feel forming. Let me think about it, I said. Relief flooded both their faces. So obvious it was almost embarrassing. They thought they'd won. They thought the old woman with the walker and the slurred speech was going to roll over and hand them the keys to everything she'd built. Of course, Craig said, patting my shoulder with the absent affection one might show a dog. Take all the time you need. But even as he said it, I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. They wouldn't wait long for my decision. They'd already made theirs. That night, I lay in the narrow bed in their guest room, my room now, I supposed, and listened to the sounds of their house settling around me. Different creaks than my house, different rhythms. Through the thin walls, I could hear the murmur of their voices, discussing me, no doubt, making plans. I closed my eyes and tried to picture my house as I'd left it. The kitchen with its cheerful yellow walls and the window over the sink that looked out onto the bird feeder. The living room with the built-in bookshelves that Craig had helped me install when he was 25 and still called me every Sunday. The master bedroom with the walk-in closet that still held Anderson's clothes, even after all these years. My house, my home, my life. They thought I was weak, confused, dependent. They thought the stroke had taken more than just my balance and my confidence. They thought I was ready to be managed, handled, disposed of with the kind of gentle efficiency reserved for problems that needed solving. What they didn't know, what I was only beginning to remember myself, was that I had spent 40 years in real estate, 40 years learning to read people, to anticipate their moves, to protect my interests while smiling politely at their attempts to manipulate me. 40 years building a network of contacts, learning the law, understanding exactly how property and power really worked. The stroke had slowed my body. It had made me vulnerable in ways I was still learning to navigate. But it hadn't touched the part of me that had survived widowhood at 33, raised a son alone, built a business from nothing, and accumulated assets that represented decades of careful planning and hard work. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and smiled in the darkness. They wanted to play games with the old woman? Fine. But they were about to learn that some games have rules they never bothered to read. The physical therapy appointment was Penelope's idea, of course. We need to keep you moving, Eileen, she'd said with that practiced smile, as if mobility were a choice I was making rather than a daily battle I was fighting. But I went along with it, letting Craig drive me to the medical center 3 times a week, working with a perky 20-something therapist named Gal, who spoke to me in the overly bright tones reserved for children and the elderly. It was after one of these sessions, 2 weeks after their initial house conversation, that I learned the truth about my situation. I'd finished my exercises earlier than usual. My left leg was cooperating better that day, and was sitting in the waiting area while Craig chatted with the receptionist about insurance paperwork. Penelope had driven separately, claiming she needed to run errands, but I suspected she was meeting Craig here to discuss me. They did that now, talked about me in my presence as if my hearing had gone along with my balance. I was struggling to zip my purse, my right hand still clumsy with fine motor skills, when I heard Penelope's voice from around the corner. Completely unreasonable about the house, she was saying, her voice carrying that edge of frustration she usually kept hidden when I was around. She keeps saying she's going home, but Craig, look at her. She can barely walk to the bathroom without that walker. My fingers stilled on the zipper. The waiting area was arranged in an L shape, with a hallway leading to the restrooms that created a blind spot. They couldn't see me, but their voices carried clearly in the sterile air. I know. Craig's voice, heavy with something that might have been guilt or irritation. But she's my mother, Jen. I can't just force her. You won't have to force her. God, Craig, think strategically for once. She's no good anymore. She can't live alone, she can't drive. She needs help with everything. Sell the house and tell her it needs major repairs, that the foundation is cracking or something. Use the money to put her somewhere appropriate. The words hit me like a physical blow. She's no good anymore. As if I were a broken appliance. Something that had outlived its usefulness and needed to be discarded. The house is worth at least $400,000, Penelope continued, and now her voice carried the calculating tone I'd heard her use when discussing Craig's promotion prospects or her sister's divorce settlement. Maybe more in this market. We could pay off the credit cards. Finally get that kitchen renovation we've been wanting. She doesn't need that much space anyway. What if she says no? Craig asked, and I held my breath waiting for his answer, hoping for some sign that he was uncomfortable with this plan, that some part of him remembered the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise him. Penelope's laugh was sharp. Craig, she had a stroke. Her judgment isn't what it used to be. We're her family. We're making decisions in her best interest. The lawyer said as long as we can show we're acting for her welfare, and she's not competent to manage her own affairs. Not competent. The phrase echoed in my head, each syllable a nail in the coffin of my independence. They weren't just planning to take my house. They were planning to have me declared incompetent to stop me from fighting back. I still don't feel right about this, Craig said, but his voice lacked conviction. He sounded like a man going through the motions of moral objection while already knowing he'd be convinced. Look, she's going to need care eventually anyway. Assisted living costs $60,000 a year minimum. The house money will pay for that. And what's left over? Well, we've been supporting her for months now. We deserve something for our trouble. Our trouble. As if caring for the woman who had raised Craig, who had worked 60-hour weeks to pay for his college, who had co-signed his first car loan and helped with the down payment on his starter home, was some kind of burden they'd generously shouldered. Besides, Penelope continued, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a whisper, it's not like she'll be around forever to worry about it. The doctor said another stroke could happen any time. We need to secure our future, too. The waiting room seemed to tilt around me. My hands gripped the arms of the chair as the full scope of their betrayal settled into my bones. They weren't just planning to steal my house. They were planning to warehouse me somewhere cheap and wait for me to die. I sat there for another 10 minutes, listening to them finalize their plans. Penelope had already contacted a real estate agent. Someone discreet, she said, not knowing that in a town this size, discreet was a luxury nobody could afford. They'd scheduled an inspection for next Tuesday, while I was at physical therapy. They'd found a lawyer who specialized in elder care and guardianship proceedings. They'd even researched assisted living facilities, focusing on the ones with the lowest monthly fees. They had thought of everything except the possibility that I might not be the helpless old woman they believed me to be. When Craig appeared around the corner, car keys jingling in his hand, I was calmly reading a magazine about arthritis management. "Ready to go, Mom?" he asked, and his voice carried no trace of the conversation I'd just overheard. If anything, he seemed more solicitous than usual, helping me with my jacket and making sure I had my purse. "Ready," I said, smiling at him with all the warmth I could muster. Let him think I was the grateful, dependent mother who would go quietly when the time came. The drive home was peaceful. Craig pointed out changes to the neighborhood, commented on the weather, asked about my therapy session, normal conversation between a son and his mother. If I hadn't heard what I'd heard, I might have found it comforting. but I had heard, and now I knew exactly where I stood. That evening, I excused myself early, claiming fatigue. Penelope was solicitous, bringing me an extra blanket and adjusting the room temperature. Craig stopped by to say goodnight, kissing my forehead with what seemed like genuine affection. "Love you, Mom," he said. And the terrible thing was, I believed he did love me, in his way. The way someone loves a pet that's become inconvenient, or a family heirloom that no longer fits the decor. Once they'd gone to bed, I lay in the narrow guest room bed and stared at the ceiling, my mind working through the problem like a chess puzzle. They had made their first move, the suggestion to sell the house. Their second move would be the inspection that would reveal expensive problems. Their third move would be the guardianship petition, backed by medical evidence of my incompetence. It was a good plan, thorough, probably legal, if executed correctly. The kind of plan that worked on elderly people who were isolated, confused, or too proud to fight back. Unfortunately for them, I was none of those things. I was Eileen Carell, maiden name Sullivan, and I had been fighting battles they couldn't even imagine since before Penelope was born. I'd bought my first property at 25 with money I'd saved working 2 jobs while pregnant. I'd negotiated million-dollar deals while hiding morning sickness. I'd built a real estate business from nothing while raising a child alone. More importantly, I'd done all of this while keeping careful records, maintaining important relationships, and never, ever putting all my eggs in one basket. The house on Maple Street wasn't just my home. It was my masterpiece. And they thought they could take it from me with lies about foundation problems and legal papers signed by a doctor who'd spent 20 minutes evaluating my cognitive function. I smiled in the darkness, feeling something I hadn't felt since before the stroke. The thrill of being underestimated by an opponent who didn't know the game they were playing. Tomorrow, I would begin my own moves. Quiet moves. Careful moves. The kind of moves that looked like compliance while actually being preparation. They wanted to play chess with the old woman in the wheelchair. Perfect. But first, I needed to make a phone call to someone who owed me a very big favor. Someone who worked at the county courthouse and had access to property records. Someone who could tell me exactly which name was still on the deed to my house. Because there was one detail Penelope and Craig had never bothered to check. One small technicality that was about to become very, very important. The house on Maple Street had been purchased by Eileen Sullivan, not Eileen Carell. When I'd married Anderson, I'd kept my maiden name on all my real estate transactions, a feminist gesture that had seemed progressive at the time but was really just good business sense. As far as the law was concerned, Eileen Carell, Craig's mother, the woman they were planning to have declared incompetent, had no legal claim to the property at all. But Eileen Sullivan? She owned it outright. The next morning, I waited until Craig left for work and Penelope departed for her yoga class, a Tuesday routine as predictable as clockwork, before I made my first call. My hands shook slightly as I dialed the number I'd memorized decades ago, but my voice was steady when Marcia Williamson answered on the second ring. "County Clerk's office, this is Marcia." "Marcia, it's Eileen Sullivan." The pause that followed stretched long enough for me to wonder if she'd forgotten me, but then her voice warmed with recognition, and something that sounded like relief. "Eileen, my God, I haven't heard from you it must be 3 years. How are you? Mom told me about your stroke, and I've been meaning to call, but I'm fine," I interrupted gently. Marcia was Mrs. Williamson's daughter, the neighbor who'd found me after my fall. She'd grown up next door, had worked at the courthouse for 15 years now, and owed her first job recommendation to a call I'd made on her behalf. "Actually, I need a favor. A quiet one." "Of course. What do you need?" "I need you to run a property search for me. The house at 1247 Maple Street. I need to know exactly whose name is on the current deed, and I need copies of all the documentation. Everything from the original purchase to the present." "That's your house, isn't it? Is everything okay?" I chose my words carefully. "Let's just say I need to refresh my memory about some details. And Marcia, this needs to stay between us for now." "Understood. Give me 20 minutes. 23 minutes later, Marcia called back with information that confirmed what I'd hoped and feared. The deed was still registered to Eileen E. Sullivan, unmarried female. No amendments, no transfers, no joint ownership with Anderson, even after our marriage. The tax records, mortgage payments, even the homeowner's insurance, all in my maiden name. Eileen, Marcia said carefully, if you need legal help with anything? Not yet, I said, but thank you. And Marcia, if anyone else comes asking about this property, I never heard from you. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet living room, processing what this meant. Craig and Penelope's plan depended on them having some claim to my property, either through guardianship or by convincing me to sign papers. But they couldn't touch what they couldn't legally prove existed. As far as any court was concerned, Eileen Carell, the woman they were planning to have declared incompetent, was a renter in her son's house, dependent on his charity. Eileen Sullivan, the property owner, didn't officially exist in their world. I was still contemplating the beautiful irony of this when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. Too early for Penelope's return, and Craig never came home for lunch. I moved to the window, pushing aside the curtain just enough to see a young woman climbing out of a battered Honda Civic. She looked to be in her mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and clothes that suggested she'd dressed for function rather than fashion. She stood at the end of the driveway for a moment, studying the house with an expression I couldn't quite read, before walking purposefully to the front door. The doorbell rang twice before I managed to navigate from the living room to the foyer. When I opened the door, I found myself looking into eyes that were achingly familiar. The same deep brown as Craig's, the same stubborn set to the jaw that I recognized from my own mirror. "Are you Eileen Carell?" she asked, and her voice carried a slight tremor that she was trying hard to hide. "I am. I'm Lillian Carell." She paused, as if the words were difficult to say. "I'm your granddaughter." The world tilted slightly, the same way it had during my stroke. I gripped the doorframe, not from physical weakness this time, but from the shock of recognition. This was Craig's daughter, the daughter he'd abandoned when he was barely 21, the child he'd walked away from when his girlfriend Shirley refused to have an abortion. "Lillian," I whispered, and the name felt strange on my tongue. I'd said it 1,000 times in my mind over the years, wondered what she looked like, how she was growing up, whether she knew she had a father who'd chosen not to know her. "I know this is unexpected," she said quickly, as if she thought I might close the door in her face, "but I need to talk to you about my father, about things." I opened the door wider. "Come in." She followed me to the living room, moving with the careful awareness of someone who wasn't sure of her welcome. I settled into my chair, gesturing for her to take the sofa, and studied her face, searching for traces of the family I'd lost and found again. "How did you find me?" I asked. "It wasn't easy. Dad's name isn't on my birth certificate, and Mom never wanted to talk about him. But when she died last year," Lillian's voice caught slightly, "when she died, I found some letters, old ones, from when I was little. You wrote to her, asking about me, asking if you could see me." The letters. I'd written dozens of them over the years, sent to Shirley's last known address, begging for just a photograph, a school report, anything that would connect me to the granddaughter I'd never been allowed to know. Shirley had never responded, and eventually, I'd stopped trying. "She kept them," Lillian continued. "All of them. And at the bottom of the box, there was one letter she'd never sent. A letter to you, telling you about me, about how much she wished things could have been different." I felt tears prick my eyes, tears I'd thought I'd cried years ago when I'd accepted that I would never know this child. "Why now?" I asked gently. "Why come looking for me now?" Lillian's composure cracked slightly. "Because I'm in trouble, real trouble, and I don't have anywhere else to turn." Over the next hour, Lillian told me her story. She'd graduated from college with a degree in social work and crushing student loans. She'd been working at a nonprofit, trying to help kids aging out of foster care, when budget cuts eliminated her position. She'd been unemployed for 6 months, living on credit cards and hope, when her mother's cancer returned with a vengeance. "I spent everything on her medical bills," Lillian said, her voice steady but her hands shaking as she spoke. "Everything I had, everything I could borrow. It wasn't enough. She died anyway, and now I'm about to lose the apartment. My car's being repossessed next week, and I owe $40,000 to the hospital." She looked up at me with eyes full of pride and desperation. "I'm not asking for money. I needed to meet you, to know where I came from, Mom always said I had your hands. She held up her own hands, and I saw it immediately. The long fingers, the narrow palms that were mirror images of my own. What about Craig? I asked carefully. Have you contacted him? Lillian's expression hardened. I tried. 3 months ago, when Mom was dying, I found his number, called his house. A woman answered. His wife, I guess. When I explained who I was, she hung up on me. I called back, and she said if I contacted them again, they'd call the police. Penelope. Of course. The woman who was planning to steal my house and warehouse me in a nursing home had also denied my granddaughter's existence. So you don't know, I said slowly. Know what? I'm living here, with Craig and Penelope. I had a stroke and they took me in. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Things between us are complicated right now. Lillian's eyes widened. Oh God, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have come here. If they find out, they won't, I said firmly. Not unless you want them to. She studied my face, and I could see her trying to read the undercurrents, the things I wasn't saying. There's something else going on, isn't there? Smart girl. Shirley had raised her well. Lillian, I said carefully, what do you know about real estate law? Not much. Why? Because I think we might be able to help each other. I told her everything. About the overheard conversation. About Penelope and Craig's plan to sell my house and have me declared incompetent. About the property being in my maiden name. The legal loophole that gave me an advantage they didn't know about. But I can't execute a plan like this alone, I said. I need someone who can move freely, who can make calls and handle paperwork, and do things I can't do from this house without raising suspicion. Lillian leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. What kind of things? The kind of things that require someone young and angry and completely unknown to the people who are trying to destroy me. A smile spread across Lillian's face. Not the polite smile of a young woman meeting her grandmother for the first time, but the fierce grin of someone who'd inherited more than just my hands. Tell me what you need me to do. As I began to outline my plan, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before the stroke. The thrill of having an ally. Not just any ally, but someone with as much reason to want revenge on Craig and Penelope as I did. They thought they were playing chess against a helpless old woman, but now they were playing against a grandmother who'd just found her pack. Lillian left that afternoon with a list of tasks and a prepaid cell phone I'd asked her to buy with the $300 in cash I kept hidden in my jewelry box. Emergency money that Craig and Penelope didn't know existed. She would call me every evening at exactly 7 o'clock. When Penelope was usually in the shower and Craig was watching the news. The first call came right on schedule. I'm in, Lillian said without preamble. Marcia Williamson gave me copies of everything. The deed, tax records, mortgage history. It's all there in black and white. Eileen Sullivan owns that house free and clear, and there's no legal connection to Eileen Carell anywhere in the paperwork. Good. What about the real estate agency? That was interesting. Kidman and Associates, right? The one you used to work for? I didn't just work for them, Lillian. I built half their business. Norman Kidman owes me more favors than he could repay in a lifetime. Well, he remembers. When I mentioned your name, he cleared his afternoon schedule. Apparently, Penelope already contacted them about listing the house. They've got an appointment scheduled for Friday morning at 10, right during your physical therapy. Of course they did. Penelope's precision in these matters was almost admirable. What did Norman say when you told him the situation? Lillian's laugh was sharp, carrying an edge that reminded me of myself at her age. He said, and I quote, "That bitch has some nerve." Apparently, Penelope was very condescending about your deteriorated mental state and your need for professional management of your assets. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Norman Kidman had been in real estate for 30 years, and he'd never liked being talked down to by people who thought they understood his business better than he did. He's going to play along with the appointment, Lillian continued. Let them show the house, discuss pricing, even start the paperwork. But nothing will be filed, and no marketing will begin. He wants to see how far they'll go. And the lawyer? Beverly Wood. She's expecting your call tomorrow at 2. Norman vouched for you, said she's the best real estate attorney in the county and has no patience for elder abuse. I smiled, feeling pieces clicking into place. You've been busy. I'm not done yet. I drove by the house today. Your real house. It's beautiful, Grandma. Grandma. The word hit me like a physical blow, but a good one. The kind that reminds you your heart is still beating. I sat in the car for an hour, just looking at it, Lillian said softly, trying to imagine what it would have been like, growing up there, having family dinners, Christmas mornings, all the things Mom and I never had. Lillian, I'm not saying that to make you feel guilty. Mom made her choices, and Dad made his. But sitting there, I realized something. This isn't just about stopping them from stealing your house. This is about reclaiming what should have been mine too. That house, that family. They stole it from both of us. The steel in her voice was unmistakable. My granddaughter had inherited more than my hands and my stubborn jaw. She'd inherited my capacity for strategic thinking and my willingness to fight for what was mine. There's something else, Lillian said. I did some digging into Craig and Penelope's finances. Public records, social media, that kind of thing. They're in deeper trouble than they let on. How deep? Credit card debt, second mortgage on this house, 2 car payments they can barely afford. Penelope's been posting on social media about wanting to renovate the kitchen, take a European vacation, buy a boat. They're living way beyond their means and counting on your house money to bail them out. So it wasn't just convenience or even callousness driving their plan. It was desperation. That made them more dangerous, but also more predictable. Desperate people made mistakes. Lillian, I need you to do something that might seem strange. I'm listening. I need you to get arrested. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Excuse me? Nothing serious. Public intoxication, maybe disorderly conduct. Something that would require Craig to be called as your next of kin. Why would... Lillian stopped, and I could almost hear the wheels turning. Oh, that's brilliant. It establishes your legal existence in his life, creates a paper trail that shows Craig Carell has a daughter he's been hiding. When this all comes out in court, and it will come out in court, it'll be one more piece of evidence that he's not the upstanding family man he pretends to be. When do you want me to do it? Saturday night. Make sure you're in the county jail, not city. And Lillian, make sure you're legitimately drunk when you do it. Method acting. She laughed, and the sound was pure mischief. I think I can manage that. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet living room, listening to the sounds of Craig and Penelope's evening routine upstairs. The shower running, the television murmuring, the comfortable sounds of people who thought they were winning. By Thursday, our plan was accelerating. Beverly Wood had reviewed all the documentation and confirmed what we'd hoped. There was no legal mechanism by which Craig and Penelope could claim any interest in property owned by Eileen Sullivan. More importantly, any attempt to have Eileen Carell declared incompetent would be irrelevant to Eileen Sullivan's property rights. It's actually quite elegant, Beverly had told me during our phone consultation. They'd have to prove that Eileen Sullivan and Eileen Carell are the same person, which would require extensive documentation they don't have access to. And even if they could prove it, they'd have to explain why they were attempting to sell property without the owner's knowledge or consent. Is what they're doing illegal? Fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy. Take your pick. When this comes to light, they'll be lucky if criminal charges are the worst of their problems. Thursday evening, Penelope made her mistake. I was in the kitchen, slowly preparing my dinner, part of the physical therapy routine I'd been maintaining, when she came in, phone pressed to her ear, talking to someone she obviously thought was a trusted confidant. Completely out of it half the time, she was saying, checking over her shoulder to make sure I wasn't listening. I continued stirring my soup, the picture of harmless confusion. The stroke really affected her judgment. She agrees to things and then forgets we talked about them. I kept stirring, my face blank, while Penelope described my supposed mental deterioration to whoever was on the other end of the call. According to her, I was increasingly confused, prone to paranoid episodes, and clearly unable to manage my own affairs. The house inspection is tomorrow. We're telling her the foundation has major problems, that it'll cost more to fix than it's worth. She trusts Craig completely. She'll sign whatever he puts in front of her. The soup was ready, but I kept stirring, letting Penelope think I was lost in my own little world while she painted a picture of a helpless old woman ready to be manipulated. I already found a nice little place for her, Sunset Manor. It's not the Ritz, but it's clean. And at $1,800 a month, we'll have plenty left over from the house sale to handle her care and maybe take that trip to Italy we've been talking about. Italy. They were planning to sell my house and use the money for a European vacation while warehousing me in the cheapest facility they could find. I turned off the stove and moved carefully to the table, Penelope's voice following me as she continued her conversation. Deserves something for all we've done for her. I mean, we've completely upended our lives, and it's not like she's grateful. Half the time she acts like we're the enemy. She wasn't wrong about that last part. That night, I called Lillian with an update on Penelope's phone call, and Lillian reported back on her own activities. The arrest is set for Saturday night. I found a college bar that's known for being rowdy, and I've already made friends with a guy whose ex-girlfriend works dispatch. She'll make sure Craig gets called. And the real estate appointment tomorrow? Norman's ready. He's going to let them dig their own grave. Full documentation of everything they say, everything they claim. He's even arranging for his secretary to accidentally record the conversation. Lillian, are you sure you want to do this? Once we start, there's no going back. They'll know you exist, and they'll know what we've done. Grandma, Lillian said, and her voice was steel wrapped in silk. I've been invisible to this family my entire life. I'm done being invisible. Friday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth and the kind of clear sky that made everything seem possible. Craig helped me to the car for physical therapy, chatting cheerfully about weekend plans, his voice carrying no trace of the betrayal he was planning to execute in just a few hours. You're looking better today, Mom, he said as we pulled into the medical center parking lot. More like your old self. I feel stronger, I said, and it wasn't a lie. I felt stronger than I had in months, charged with purpose and the sweet anticipation of justice. As Craig walked me into the therapy center, I thought about the house they were about to tour, the property they thought they were about to steal. In a few hours, they would walk through my home, calculating its value, planning its sale, congratulating themselves on their cleverness. What they didn't know was that every word they spoke would be recorded, every false claim documented, every piece of evidence we needed to destroy them carefully preserved. They thought today was the beginning of their victory. Instead, it was the beginning of their ruin. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on Sunday morning, jarring Craig from sleep with the harsh electronic shriek of the bedside phone. I lay in my narrow bed in the guest room, listening through the thin walls as he fumbled for the receiver, his voice thick with sleep and confusion. Hello? This is Craig Carell. A pause. Then his voice sharpened with something between irritation and disbelief. I'm sorry. You must have the wrong number. I don't have a daughter. Another pause. Longer this time. Lillian what? No, there's been some mistake. I heard the bed springs creak as Penelope sat up, her voice a harsh whisper in the darkness. Who is it? Craig. Who's calling at this hour? Look, officer, I'm telling you, there's been some kind of error. I don't know any Lillian Carell, and I'm certainly not her emergency contact. The silence that followed stretched long enough for me to count my heartbeats. When Craig spoke again, his voice had changed, dropping to the careful tone of someone who realized they were navigating a minefield. What did you say her mother's name was? Lillian had done her job perfectly. Drunk and disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace, and when asked for her emergency contact, she'd given them Craig's name and address, claiming he was her father. The booking paperwork would create an official record linking Craig Carell to the daughter he'd spent 26 years pretending didn't exist. I heard Craig get up, his footsteps heavy as he paced the bedroom floor. Penelope's voice rose in sharp, whispered questions that I couldn't quite make out, but the tone was unmistakably furious. I have to go, Craig said finally into the phone. I'll be there in an hour. The house erupted into urgent, angry whispers after that. Craig and Penelope, trying to figure out how this ghost from his past had suddenly materialized with his name and address. I lay in my bed, smiling in the darkness, and waited. Craig left 20 minutes later, the front door slamming with enough force to rattle the windows. Penelope's angry pacing continued overhead for another hour before the house finally fell silent. At 7 a.m., I was in the kitchen making coffee when Craig returned, his face gray with exhaustion and something that looked like shock. He sat at the kitchen table without speaking, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. "Everything all right, dear?" I asked, channeling every ounce of maternal concern I could muster. "There was a situation. Someone who claimed to be—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "It's complicated, Mom." Penelope appeared in the doorway, still in her robe, her hair uncombed and her face tight with barely controlled fury. "Tell her," she said sharply. "Tell her about your bastard daughter." Craig flinched at the word, but I simply raised my eyebrows with what I hoped looked like innocent confusion. "Daughter? It turns out," Penelope continued, her voice dripping with venom, "that your son had a little indiscretion in college. A girl named Shirley Portman. She had a baby, and now that baby is 26 years old and showing up drunk in county lockup with Craig's name as her emergency contact." I set down my coffee cup with hands that shook just slightly, not from nerves, but from the effort of containing my satisfaction. "Craig, is this true?" My son looked up at me with eyes full of shame and something that might have been fear. "Mom, I was 21. I was stupid and scared, and I thought—" "You thought you could just pretend she didn't exist," Penelope finished. "Well, congratulations. She exists, and now she's our problem." "What did she want?" I asked quietly. "Money, probably," Penelope snapped. "They always want money. She's probably heard about the house sale and thinks she can get a piece of the action." The house sale, as if it were already a done deal. Craig's head snapped up. "How would she know about—" He stopped, looking between Penelope and me with growing suspicion. "Know about what?" I asked innocently. Penelope shot Craig a warning look, but he was already talking. "Nothing, Mom. Just, we've been discussing some options for your property, making sure everything's handled properly." "What kind of options?" The silence that followed was thick with unspoken tension. Penelope's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping, and Craig looked like a man who'd just realized he was standing in quicksand. "Craig," I said gently, "what aren't you telling me?" It all came out then, in a rush of guilty confessions and defensive justifications. The house inspection, which had revealed serious foundation problems that would cost more than the property was worth to repair. The generous offer from a developer who was willing to buy the house as is. The assisted living facility they'd already toured on my behalf. A lovely place where I'd be much safer and happier. I listened to it all with the wide-eyed confusion of a woman whose mental faculties weren't quite what they used to be, nodding and asking innocent questions that led them deeper into their web of lies. "But if the foundation is damaged," I said slowly, "shouldn't I see the inspection report? Maybe get a second opinion?" "Mom, you don't need to worry about the technical details," Craig said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. "We're handling everything. All you need to do is sign the papers." "What papers?" Penelope disappeared and returned with a folder thick with legal documents. Power of attorney forms, property transfer agreements, guardianship petitions. "These will just make everything easier," she said, spreading the papers across the kitchen table like a dealer laying out cards. "Craig will be able to handle all your financial affairs, and you won't have to worry about any of it." I picked up the power of attorney form, squinting at it as if the print were too small to read clearly. "This says Eileen Carell," I said slowly. "But the house— Didn't I buy the house before I married Anderson? Wouldn't it be in my maiden name?" The look that passed between Craig and Penelope was pure panic, quickly masked. "No, Mom," Craig said carefully. "You've been Eileen Carell for over 40 years. The house has always been in that name." I nodded as if this made perfect sense, but inside, I was savoring the moment. They'd just committed fraud in writing, claiming ownership of property they knew belonged to someone else. "I suppose you're right," I said, reaching for a pen. "You've always been so good with these things." But as I started to sign the first document, my phone rang. The prepaid cell phone Lillian had bought me, which I'd been carrying in my pocket all weekend. "Oh," I said, looking at the unfamiliar number. "I should probably answer this. It might be the doctor's office." I answered the phone, putting it on speaker as if I'd accidentally hit the wrong button. "Mrs. Sullivan?" The voice was crisp, professional, unmistakably legal. "This is Beverly Wood from Wood & Associates. I have some urgent information about your property at 1247 Maple Street." Craig and Penelope froze, the blood draining from their faces as Beverly continued. We've discovered some irregularities in recent attempts to transfer this property. It appears someone has been representing themselves as the owner, but our records clearly show the deed is registered to Eileen E. Sullivan, not Eileen Carell. We need to speak with you immediately about potential fraud charges. I looked up at Craig and Penelope with what I hoped appeared to be dawning comprehension. Fraud? I repeated, as if the word were foreign to me. Yes, ma'am. It's a serious matter. We also have documentation of conversations where individuals discussed selling your property without your knowledge or consent, claiming you were mentally incompetent. The district attorney's office is very interested in this case. Penelope made a strangled sound, her face going from pale to green. Craig just stared at me, and I could see the exact moment when he realized what had happened. Mom, he said slowly, what's going on? I ended the call and set the phone down carefully on the table, next to the fraudulent documents they'd wanted me to sign. What's going on? I said, and my voice was no longer confused or frail. Is that I'm not nearly as stupid as you thought I was. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Even the refrigerator seemed to hold its breath. You see, I continued, settling back in my chair with the satisfaction of a chess player announcing checkmate. When you spend 40 years in real estate, you learn a few things about property law. You learn to keep careful records. You learn to protect your assets. And you learn to recognize predators. Penelope found her voice first. You can't do this. You're sick. You had a stroke. You need care. I had a stroke, I agreed. It affected my mobility and my speech. It didn't affect my intelligence, my memory, or my legal rights. Eileen Sullivan is alive and well and very angry about the attempted theft of her property. The inspection, Craig started. The inspection that your real estate agent recorded? The one where you lied about foundation problems that don't exist? Where you discussed selling property you don't own to pay for your credit card debt and Italian vacation? I smiled. And it wasn't a grandmother's smile. It was the smile of a predator who'd been playing prey. Norman Kidman has been a friend of mine for 30 years, Craig. Did you really think he wouldn't call me when some woman walked into his office and tried to fraudulently list my house? Craig's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly. We were trying to help you. You were trying to steal from me. There's a difference. What do you want? Penelope asked, and her voice was barely a whisper. I looked at them both. My son who had abandoned his daughter and tried to steal from his mother, and his wife who had orchestrated it all while planning to warehouse me in the cheapest facility she could find. I want you to leave, I said simply. Pack your things and get out of my son's house. Today. This is our house, Penelope started. This house has a second mortgage you can't afford, and when the bank finds out about your attempted fraud, they'll be very interested in your financial stability. I'd suggest you start looking for somewhere else to live. Craig was staring at me as if I were a stranger. Maybe I was. And Lillian? I asked. My granddaughter, who you refuse to acknowledge? She'll be living with me now, in my house, the one you'll never set foot in again. I stood, my walker making its familiar tap-tap-tap on the kitchen floor. But I was no longer the helpless old woman who'd been living in their guest room. I was Eileen Sullivan, property owner, grandmother, and architect of their defeat. You have until sunset, I said. After that, you'll be trespassing. As I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them sitting among their worthless, fraudulent documents, I heard Penelope begin to cry. But they weren't tears of remorse or regret. They were tears of rage at being outmaneuvered by the old woman they'd underestimated, and I found I didn't care at all.